It was many years ago when I learned how to drive. In fact, before I took driving lessons, I pretty much had a sense of how to drive from all the arcade games that I used to play. I used to be extremely good at one particular VR game back in the day that was a driving game that taught me how to make turns properly, how to accelerate and brake. Didn't teach me so much about indicating and looking over my shoulder and checking blind spots, but otherwise I had a fair sense of how to drive. And Bristow, my driving instructor, was extremely good. He could see that I was able to drive already. I was the first person in my class to go over 30 miles an hour, which was very daring and very bold. And in fact, he strongly encouraged me to take advanced driving lessons. One of the things I remember in particular when it came to accelerating and braking is Bristow told me to always imagine the Queen was sitting in the back of the car with a cup of tea, and one would not want Her Royal Highness to spill tea upon herself when I was accelerating or braking, so it always had to be smooth to accelerate and brake. But he saw that I was quite an accomplished driver and encouraged me to take advanced driving lessons, although I never did, and to take the advanced driving test, which would have reduced my insurance. This comes to mind in particular as my daughter, now very much a teenager, is learning how to drive, and has shared with me that actually the way that I drive makes her nervous. And I find this really interesting because I've become very used to how I drive. She says she finds it uncomfortable that I don't often drive with both hands on the wheel, and I say it's perfectly safe because, and I explain myself and then realize it doesn't matter. And she says, I don't really like it when you eat food while you drive, and I say, you're right, it is actually illegal to do so, but it's perfectly safe because, and I start to explain myself and again realize it doesn't matter. And it doesn't matter because what I think is comfortable is not what makes my daughter comfortable. And that makes me think about what it means to be a rabbi in a temple as well. As my daughter makes me a better driver, and now I have my hands at 10 to 2 regularly, and now I don't even pick up my phone when we've stopped at a light and anything like that, and I try not to eat when I drive. She's making me a better driver again. It's interesting because it makes me wonder about what would the young people say about our community. Because they tend not to come to our community unless we really strongly encourage them. For example, have them as lay readers, Torah readers, in our High Holy Day services. Or if they're celebrating becoming Bar Bat Mitzvah. Are they actually comfortable with the way that we do things? Are they comfortable with the way that our community is set up? Are they comfortable with our expression of Judaism? If you ask them, they'll tell you quite clearly the answer is no. They're actually not very comfortable with it at all. The God that they see, the God of the liturgy, is not a God that they believe in. This patriarchal God above, sitting on a cloud, whom we call king, whom we worship, adore as a ruler, they don't experience God in that way at all. And that's not to say that they're secular in any way. In fact, the opposite. I actually think young people have a very strong sense of spirituality. It's just they don't like the language that we use. And they're not too keen on many of the rituals too, which they feel seem very antiquated. And in part, that's our fault, because we haven't explained to them the depth of our rituals and the depth of our liturgy. And at the same time, we have to understand that we're members of a movement called Reform Judaism, because Judaism has always reformed, always changed. Its liturgy has always changed and developed and grown. Yes, there were some things that were staples, particular forms of the liturgy, perhaps the beginning of blessings, for example. But then when we think of Tichines and Piyutim, which were added to liturgy or added to the spiritual life of our community, it shows us that actually Judaism, even liturgy, has developed and grown, and Jewish practice has developed and grown. And so maybe one of the questions that we need to be asking ourselves is, does this make young people comfortable? And if not, is there a future in Judaism? Our responsibility is l'dor vador, from generation to generation. How much change can we tolerate in order to ensure that the young people actually experience and enjoy Judaism? And perhaps one of the things that we can look at for this is the quotation from Pirkei Avot. Al shlosha devarim ha'olam omed, al ha'torah va'al ha'avodah va'al gemilut chasadim. Upon three things the world stands: upon study, upon worship, and upon good deeds. And our Judaism needs to have all three. What's interesting is that people who tend to be older tend to focus more on the first two, and people who are younger tend to focus on the last one. For the young people, action is key. And for us, it's important, as I said in my High Holy Day sermon, in the Erev Rosh Hashanah sermon, it's important that it's not just action, because just action by itself you don't have to be a Jew to do. It has to be based in Torah, it has to be based in community, it has to be a different form of worship. As someone said to me, as someone said last week, for me, social action is more important than worship because it's my way of worshipping. That's really interesting and really important. So as we reach our secular new year, our 2026, we need to ask ourselves, what's our community's New Year's resolution? Is it to always do the same things that we've always done? Or is it to see the next generation and ask them, what makes you comfortable? Now, of course, remember that Judaism isn't always about being comfortable. Sometimes it's about being challenged. But it needs to be safe. It needs to be liturgy and services that are safe, that are inviting, that can then be challenging. And so we need to think, what's our New Year resolution? Because last week in my pre-Shabbat message, I asked, what's your New Year's resolution? This week it's, what's our New Year's resolution? How are we going to resolve to make the next generation feel comfortable, safe, and welcome in our temple? How are we going to make sure that they feel stimulated, excited? We already do some things which are very powerful for them. The Hochberg Academy, for example, is transformative. It's so essential for the young people of our community. We've actually just booked our trip to DC for the Letaken trip, the Religious Action Center trip that's happening in a few months. Again, it's a very powerful moment for our young people to connect their social action to our temple, to their Judaism, and to see how many other hundreds and hundreds of young Jews across the country are doing the same thing. But now we also need to ask ourselves, what else in our community? What do we need to do? Because we may assume that the way that we're driving, or the way we're driving the community, we may assume it's safe and good and wonderful. But actually, it might make other people, particularly young people, very uncomfortable indeed. And if that's the case, just as I am learning to become a better driver, maybe we need to learn how to become a better community. A community that hears the voice of the young people who say, this really doesn't feel good to me. And ask ourselves, what do we have in Judaism that exists already? Or what do we need to create to make sure it does feel good for you? I hope that you'll join me this evening. It's actually 38 years to the day since my bar mitzvah ceremony, and it is the portion of Vayechi, which is nice, so we'll be reading that tomorrow. I hope you'll be able to join us for an Auld Lang Syne Kabbalat Shabbat service and for Torah study tomorrow, which looks at the motivation of Joseph's brothers. Are they lying when they say to Joseph that Jacob said he should forgive them, or are they actually telling the truth? Are they doing it for their own benefit, or are they doing it for the benefit of others? What I'd really like, what I hope for, is that you'll be able to join me for those, and also for the presentation by Shelley this coming Sunday, which is going to be a really powerful presentation, and that you'll be able to share your thoughts with me. Maybe talk to a young person or two and ask them, does this make you feel good? And if not, what do we need to do to change? I'd love to hear your thoughts. I hope to see you later. I wish you Shabbat Shalom.